I never thought I'd see a dog that could break me until I met Vela. She wasn't just aggressive. She was pure storm wrapped in black and tan fur. The first time I saw her up close, she charged at the fence like it owed her money, teeth bared, muscles coiled, and eyes flashing with a kind of intelligence that was terrifying. A few neighbors had tried to approach her before, thinking they could tame her with treats or kind words. Each one left with scratches, bruises, and a story about a dog that refused to be contained. I stood on the edge of our backyard, heart hammering, watching as she knocked over a delivery man who had dared to bring a package. Papers scattered, the man stumbled back, and Vela's low growl vibrated through the air like a warning thunderclap. I had read about dogs with difficult temperaments, but nothing prepared me for this level of raw power and defiance. Even from behind the safety of the fence, I felt the threat in her gaze, a mix of suspicion and challenge. My little sister, Leora, was out there too, trying to reach her with soft words and an extended hand. She was brave for her age, curious but completely unprepared. One wrong move and she could have been hurt, and I knew it. I watched helplessly as Vela lunged, forcing Leora to step back, nearly losing her balance. Fear coiled in my chest like a knot. My instincts screamed at me to intervene, but I knew I couldn't risk it. Every failed attempt by anyone who came near Vela had shown me that this was not just a dog with bad behavior. She was untamable by ordinary means. And yet, just when I thought there was no hope, someone came to mind, a retired veteran named Corvin. Stories about him had floated through the neighborhood for years. He had a reputation for handling situations no one else could. Stray dogs, aggressive animals, even cases that seemed hopeless. He had a way of breaking through where others failed. Somehow, part of me felt that if there was anyone who could handle Vela, it would be him. The stakes were simple but immense. If no one could reach her, if no one could earn her trust, we would lose her. She might end up in a shelter or worse, put down. And worse still, someone could get hurt trying. I glanced at Leora, who had stopped moving but wouldn't tear her eyes away from the dog. She believed even now that she could connect with Vela if she tried hard enough. I wanted to believe it too, but as Vela's growl deepened and her posture stiffened, I felt a chill. This was not going to be easy. This was going to test every ounce of patience, courage, and strategy we had. From that moment, I realized something crucial. This story wasn't just about a wild dog. It was about fear, control, trust, and the kind of courage that doesn't come naturally. And it was about to change everything for my sister, for me, and for the dog that refused to be tamed. After that first encounter with Vela, I realized just how little control I had over my life right now. I had moved back to my childhood home only a few months ago, after Mom and Dad passed away, to help care for my younger sister, Leora. She was 12, full of curiosity and energy, the kind of girl who could turn a dull afternoon into an adventure. But our home, once familiar and comforting, now felt like a battlefield. Between managing the house, dealing with neighbors, and trying to keep Leora safe around a dog like Vela, I felt stretched thin, like every step I took brought me closer to some invisible edge. Our house was a modest 2-story in the suburbs, with a large backyard enclosed by a high wooden fence. The yard had once been a place of laughter and summer games, but now it felt like a cage, not for us, but for the wild energy lurking just beyond the gate. Every morning I would hear her growl from the other side of the fence, low and threatening, yet strangely intelligent. Vela didn't just act on instinct. She studied, measured, and reacted in ways that made it clear no ordinary approach would work. I glanced at Leora as she arranged a few sticks and toys along the fence, hoping to coax Vela into curiosity or play. Her determination was touching, even admirable, but also terrifying. I wanted to tell her to step back, to stop tempting the dog, but the words caught in my throat. Every time I opened my mouth, I felt the weight of helplessness pressing down on me. Leora was small, but her courage was enormous. Watching her out there, I felt a mix of pride and fear, and it gnawed at me constantly. Then there was Grandpa Torin. He was a stoic man, the kind of grandparent whose love was quiet but firm. He had always been protective, strict in ways that frustrated me as a child, but now his warnings rang with new clarity. Caliph, he said one afternoon as we surveyed the backyard from the porch. "That dog isn't just wild. She's dangerous. Don't let your sister get too close." His voice carried authority but also concern, and I could see the worry etched in the lines of his face. Grandpa had been around animals his whole life, respected them, understood them. If he said she was untamable, that alone told me how serious the situation was. Vela wasn't just a dog, she was a force of nature. I had seen people try to train aggressive dogs before in videos or stories, but this was different. This was intelligent aggression, a deliberate assertion of control. She didn't chase out of fear or hunger. She did it because she knew she could. The other side of the fence became a stage where every visitor, delivery person, and neighbor became actors in her relentless testing of boundaries. Every time she lunged or snapped, it reminded me that I had no idea how to stop her. Even our neighbors had started avoiding our house. I could hear whispered warnings from behind curtains, comments about the wild dog no one can handle, and the occasional sympathetic shake of the head. My pride, as much as my fear, resisted the idea that I might fail here. I wanted to prove that I could manage this, protect Leora, and somehow reach this dog that had already broken everyone else's attempts. And so, a strange tension settled over our home. Each morning began with the quiet observation of Vela. Each evening ended with careful strategizing. I tried reading about German Shepherds, watching training videos, attempting small, cautious interactions, but the results were always the same. Snarls, lunges, and that sharp, piercing intelligence in her eyes that seemed to say, "You are not in charge here." It wasn't just fear that grew in our home, it was anticipation. I could see the same mix in Leora. She didn't understand the danger fully, but she sensed the challenge. She believed that somehow she could connect with Vela even when I doubted it. And as much as I wanted to discourage her, I realized I couldn't. She needed to see the dog for herself, needed to face the wildness that I had only begun to understand. That's when I started thinking about Corvin, a retired veteran known in the neighborhood for handling situations no one else could. A man whose quiet authority and patience had tamed animals that seemed beyond control. I had only heard the stories, but in my heart, I felt that he was the only person who might be able to teach us what we were missing: the art of patience, the understanding of trust, and the courage to let go of fear. The stage was set. Our family, fractured by loss and stretched by responsibility, was about to confront a challenge bigger than any of us had faced before. Vela had become more than just a problem. She had become a mirror for our fears, our strengths, and our capacity to adapt. And I knew deep down that whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same. The tension in our backyard had become almost unbearable. Every day, Vela seemed to escalate, testing our limits in ways that made fear a constant companion. It wasn't just a dog acting out. It was as if she understood the dynamics in our household better than any of us did. I had begun to notice small patterns, the way her ears flicked when Leora approached, how her tail stiffened when I tried to offer her a treat, the sharp, calculating glint in her eyes when anyone moved too quickly. She wasn't just aggressive. She was intelligent, unpredictable, and utterly untouchable. The first real confrontation happened on a Saturday morning. Leora had placed a bowl of water near the fence, trying to coax Vela closer. I watched from the porch, my hands gripping the railing, heart racing. The dog approached slowly, muscles tense, jaw tight, and for a moment it seemed like we might finally make a breakthrough. Then she lunged, knocking the bowl over, spraying water across the yard. Leora stumbled back, gasping, and I ran forward, my own voice shaking. "Leora, get back." It wasn't an isolated incident. Each attempt we made to connect with her ended the same way: frustration, fear, and a growing sense of helplessness. I tried reading about aggressive German Shepherds online, following the advice to remain calm, assert dominance, or reward good behavior. Nothing worked. She ignored commands, growled at the simplest gestures, and even tried to slip through the gate when she sensed hesitation. Watching her reminded me that she had already broken everyone who tried to tame her before. Grandpa Torin's warnings grew more urgent. "Caliph, this isn't just a stubborn dog. She's dangerous. Keep your sister away before someone gets hurt." I understood the wisdom in his words, but I also felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on me. I couldn't just step back. Leora's hope was fragile, and it terrified me to think that fear alone might destroy the bond she wanted to form. The emotional stakes were even higher when neighbors started taking notice. One day, a man delivering groceries froze at the gate, eyes wide as Vela lunged and snapped in his direction. He stumbled back, dropping the bags, and muttered something about calling animal control. Another neighbor, Mrs. Ilara, peeked over the fence, shaking her head and muttering about a dog no one could handle. Every failed interaction made it clearer. We were dealing with a dog that had beaten every single person who tried to control her. Meanwhile, Leora refused to give up. She would stand at the fence, softly talking to Vela, her small voice full of hope and innocence. "Come on, girl." "It's okay," she'd whisper. And for a fleeting moment, the dog's ears would flick, her tail twitch, as if she were considering whether to trust her. But then, almost immediately, she would lunge again, a reminder that control was still completely out of our hands. Watching Leora face rejection and danger at the same time, I felt a mixture of pride and fear that twisted in my chest. I wanted to protect her, but every instinct I had told me I couldn't. The household grew tense. Meals were quiet, conversations cautious, every sound outside making us jump. I found myself pacing, watching the backyard constantly, trying to predict Vela's next move. Leora's hope clashed with my fear, Grandpa Torin's concern with my determination. The emotional pressure was crushing, and I began to question my own judgment. Was I doing the right thing by letting Leora engage with the dog? Was I foolish for thinking we could ever reach her? I started keeping notes. Every reaction, every gesture, every failed approach. I was trying to understand her mind, even if I couldn't control her. It was exhausting. And still, the unspoken truth loomed over us. If no one could tame Vela, the consequences could be devastating. Someone could get hurt. Or worse, she might have to be taken away permanently. The idea of losing her or letting her hurt someone was unbearable. It was in this tension, this relentless cycle of hope and fear, that I realized we needed help. We couldn't do this on our own. The stakes were too high, the challenge too great, and the danger too real. The wildness in Vela was beyond my understanding, and I began to accept that I couldn't force what had to be earned. That's when the thought of Corvin, the retired veteran known for handling animals no one else could, became a lifeline. Maybe he could see what I couldn't, maybe he could succeed where every attempt I'd made had failed. But even thinking about bringing him in filled me with a mixture of hope and anxiety. Could anyone truly reach her? Could we trust this veteran to do what we hadn't been able to? And if he failed, what would happen to Leora, to me, to the fragile piece of our home? The answers weren't clear, but one thing was certain. We were on the brink of a confrontation that would test every ounce of courage, patience, and understanding we possessed. Vela, for her part, remained unchanged in her unpredictability. Every snarl, every lunge, every challenge was a reminder that this was more than just a wild dog. It was a storm we had no choice but to weather. And somewhere in that storm, the first hints of a solution were waiting. We just didn't know how close, or how shocking it would be. After weeks of failed attempts, constant fear, and sleepless nights, I realized that we were hitting a wall. Every method I tried, every gentle approach Leora attempted, had ended in frustration and danger. Vela wasn't just untamable, she was beyond anything we could handle on our own. I remember sitting on the porch one evening, watching her pace the yard like a predator calculating every move, and finally admitting to myself that our pride and determination weren't enough. Something, or someone, different had to intervene. That's when I remembered Corvin, the retired veteran whose name had been whispered through the neighborhood for years, a man rumored to have rehabilitated animals that no one else could touch. He was calm, authoritative, and somehow had a way of connecting with creatures that didn't trust anyone. Leora had heard the stories too, and her eyes lit up the first time I mentioned him. "Do you think he can really help her?" she asked, hope lacing her small voice. I didn't know, but I had no other option. Calling him was nerve-wracking. What if he refused? What if he came and couldn't succeed? But within a day, Corvin agreed to visit. When he arrived, he didn't rush in with commands or treats. Instead, he simply observed. He walked slowly around the yard, eyes studying Vela from a distance, noting her posture, her breathing, the way she tilted her head when Leora spoke. For the first time, I realized that understanding her behavior was more important than controlling it. "Don't try to push her," Corvin said quietly, glancing at me. His voice carried the kind of calm authority that made you want to obey, not out of fear but respect. "She's not misbehaving. She's testing, she's protecting, she's asserting herself. You need to meet her where she is, not where you want her to be." I nodded, feeling both relief and intimidation. This was going to be different. This wasn't about treats, commands, or forcing affection. It was about understanding and patience. He asked Leora and me to participate, but in a way we hadn't imagined. "You'll need to earn her trust," Corvin explained. "You can't rush it. You can't approach with fear, anger, or excitement. You have to be steady, calm, predictable." That was a hard lesson to internalize. After all the chaos, the near accidents, and the frustration, calming myself felt nearly impossible, but I had no choice. Leora's safety and Vela's future in our home depended on it. The first attempts were tense. Corvin had us sit several feet from the fence and simply observe Vela. No sudden movements, no words, no gestures, just presence. She growled, paced, and occasionally barked sharply, but we didn't react. It was excruciating. Every instinct screamed at me to call her, to punish her, to assert control, but Corvin's calm demeanor kept me in check. He explained that our fear or impatience would only reinforce her distrust. Over the next few days, we followed Corvin's methodical approach. He let Vela set the pace, approaching only when she was ready. He demonstrated subtle body language cues that I had never noticed before. The flick of an ear, the shift of her weight, the position of her tail. Each small signal was a piece of the puzzle, and as we began to recognize them, the tension slowly shifted. For the first time, I saw moments of hesitation in her lunges, curiosity in her glances, and even the tiniest flicker of trust. It was a turning point not just for Vela, but for all of us. I realized that control had been an illusion. We weren't taming her through force or discipline. We were earning her cooperation by understanding her world. Corvin's presence transformed fear into possibility. Leora began to see that patience could be stronger than courage alone, and I felt a new kind of confidence settling in me, one built on observation and empathy rather than frustration. By the end of that first week, the first real breakthrough occurred. Vela approached cautiously, sniffing Leora's extended hand and then retreating without aggression. It was a small gesture, almost imperceptible, but it signified a monumental shift. The dog that had knocked down delivery men and terrified the neighborhood was starting to consider trust, starting to acknowledge that we were not a threat. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to hope. Hope that this storm could be weathered, that fear could be replaced with understanding, and that our home could become safe again. The turning point wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, patient, and almost invisible, but it changed everything. From that moment, the path forward became clear. We had to respect her, wait for her, and meet her where she was. Only then could the bond we all craved begin to form. The day of the breakthrough felt almost ordinary at first. The sun was warm, the air smelled faintly of grass and wet earth, and Vela was pacing in the yard as usual, alert and tense. But something had shifted. Corvin had coached us for days to recognize subtle changes in her behavior, tiny flicks of her ears, shifts in weight, a pause before lunging. Today, for the first time, it felt like she was listening. Not to commands, but to presence, to patience. I remember standing near the fence with Leora by my side, my stomach tight with anticipation. Corvin had instructed us to remain calm, to avoid any sudden gestures, to let Vela decide the pace. Leora's small hand clutched mine, trembling slightly, her wide eyes never leaving the dog. I whispered, "It's okay, Leora, just stay still. Let her come to you." My voice was steady, but inside my heart was pounding like a drum. Vela's eyes scanned the yard, measuring us carefully. Her muscles tensed as she approached slowly, almost cautiously, tail lowered but flicking slightly. Every step she took seemed deliberate, like she was testing the ground, the air, and our intentions all at once. I could feel the tension radiating from her, the raw, unfiltered energy that had terrified us for weeks. Leora remained motionless, her small frame braced with hope and fear in equal measure. And then it happened. Vela stopped just a few feet away from the fence, sniffing the air, her body rigid, ears pricked. For a moment I thought she might lunge. I braced myself. but instead she lowered her head slowly toward Leora's outstretched hand. The tiniest flick of her tongue brushed against Leora's palm. Leora gasped softly but didn't move. The connection was fragile, but it was there. Corvin's voice broke the silence, calm and steady. "Let her decide, don't move." We waited, barely breathing. Vela circled Leora once, twice, sniffing, studying, calculating. Then, almost imperceptibly, she sat down in front of Leora and rested her head gently on her lap. My chest tightened as I realized what this meant. The dog that had been untamable, aggressive, and feared by everyone had chosen trust. She had allowed herself to be vulnerable for the first time. Leora's face lit up with disbelief and joy. "Caliph, she's letting me." Her voice cracked with emotion, a mixture of relief and exhilaration. I knelt beside her, tears pricking my eyes. The air seemed to hum with the release of tension we had carried for so long. Vela's tail wagged ever so slightly, a subtle acknowledgement of the bond that had begun to form. The breakthrough was more than a simple act of obedience. It was a revelation. Vela had tested every person who came near her, and she had failed them all. But with patience, respect, and calm authority, she had finally chosen to trust. It was a lesson in humility, in understanding that control can never be forced. Corvin explained this to us as we watched the dog settle beside Leora. "She's not tamed," he said quietly. "She's learning who she can trust. That's the real bond, and it can't be rushed or demanded." In that moment, I understood the depth of what had happened. Vela's aggression had never been about me or Leora personally. It had been about establishing her boundaries, her sense of safety. And now, through consistent patience and respect, we had crossed that threshold. It was a victory that went beyond just controlling behavior. It was about connection, empathy, and mutual trust. I looked at Leora, who was softly stroking Vela's head, her eyes sparkling with awe and triumph. I could feel my own tension dissolving, replaced with a profound sense of accomplishment and relief. Our home felt lighter, safer, and somehow warmer. Grandpa Torin, watching quietly from the porch, gave a small nod, a rare smile tugging at his lips. Even he seemed to recognize the significance of this moment. Vela's transformation wasn't complete, not entirely. She remained spirited, alert, and strong-willed. But now she had allowed herself to be seen, to connect, and to be part of our family. That day, the wild dog that had terrified the neighborhood and dominated our backyard had become a symbol of what patience, courage, and understanding could achieve. By the time the sun began to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across the yard, Vela rested her head comfortably on Leora's lap, her eyes soft, yet alert. The fear, frustration, and tension of the past week seemed to melt away. In that quiet, electrifying moment, I realized we hadn't just earned the trust of a wild dog. We had learned something deeper about ourselves, about patience, resilience, and the power of letting go of control. And as I watched my sister laugh softly, brushing Vela's ears, I knew this story would stay with us forever. After Vela finally chose to trust Leora, our home felt different. The tension that had gripped every corner seemed to lift, replaced by a cautious but real sense of peace. Watching her rest beside Leora, alert but calm, I realized how much the past weeks had changed all of us. This wasn't just a story about a wild dog. It was a story about patience, understanding, and the ways we confront fear. Leora had grown more than I could have imagined. She had learned bravery, yes, but also humility. She had discovered that courage wasn't about rushing forward recklessly. It was about steady presence, careful observation, and the quiet strength to wait. I saw it in the way she now approached Vela, her movements slower, her voice gentler, and her eyes more aware of the signals the dog was giving her. She had begun to understand the meaning of trust, that it had to be earned and never demanded. I had grown too. I realized how much my own pride and impatience had blinded me. I had wanted to control Vela, to assert authority in ways that only provoked her further. Corvin's guidance taught me that real control comes from understanding, calmness, and respect. I felt a new confidence, not a reckless one, but the kind that comes from knowing when to step back, when to observe, and when to act. It wasn't just about handling a dog. It was about handling life, challenges, and the people and animals I cared about most. Grandpa Torin, who had watched skeptically from the porch at first, now seemed lighter. He didn't say much, but I could see the approval in the small nods, the rare smiles. Even he had learned something from the process, that love, patience, and respect could reach places force and fear never could. Our family had found balance in an unlikely place, shaped by the challenge of earning Vela's trust. Vela herself remained spirited, intelligent, and strong-willed. She was never going to be the kind of dog who obeyed blindly or followed orders without question. And that was okay. She had her personality, her boundaries, and her instincts, and we had learned to respect all of it. Our relationship wasn't built on dominance but on connection. Every day I watched as she followed subtle cues from Leora, as she responded to calm presence rather than commands, and I understood that this bond, once forged, was far stronger than fear could ever be. Looking back, the experience taught me something fundamental. Real growth, whether in people or animals, comes not from force, but from patience, empathy, and trust. I had feared for Leora's safety, for our ability to protect her and the dog, but I had discovered that fear could be transformed into understanding. The same hands that had once feared Vela's aggression now stroked her head with care and affection, recognizing the strength and intelligence that lay behind those sharp teeth and piercing eyes. Our home felt fuller, warmer, and more alive than it had in months. Leora laughed more freely, playing with Vela in ways that were safe and joyful. I felt lighter, more capable, and more connected to both my sister and the dog who had once seemed untouchable. And Corvin, he remained a quiet presence, a reminder that sometimes the greatest lessons come from those who observe more than they command. In the end, the story of Vela was never just about taming a wild dog. It was about patience, empathy, and the courage to step back and let trust grow naturally. It was about family, resilience, and discovering that sometimes the most powerful bonds are forged not through force, but through understanding. As I watched Vela rest her head on Leora's lap, eyes half closed but alert, I smiled. The wild storm had softened, not because we had forced it, but because we had learned to move with it. And in that quiet, ordinary moment, our family became stronger, wiser, and closer than we had ever been before.